Hey guys, welcome to a special edition of Cameo All Hands. Today we have a very special guest and a person that I've personally become extremely inspired by. I am so excited to bring him here to get to hear his story more. And Shaka, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I'm really excited to be here and just vibe out with the crew, man.
And then obviously you're repping the D, you're from Detroit. Talk about growing up there.
Yeah, so I grew up on the east side of Detroit in a neighborhood that back then really looked like, it was a working class neighborhood. But, unfortunately what was going on inside my household didn't represent what was happening on the outside. And so my mother was pretty abusive physically, emotionally, verbally. So by the time I was 14 years old, I just decided to run away. I no longer wanted to be physically hit out of anger. I was an honor roll scholarship student, with dreams of being a doctor. And when I ran away, I thought that somebody would just see this handsome little kid and take me in and wrap me in the love that I think all young people are deserving of. And unfortunately, I found myself being seduced into the crack cocaine trade. And, this was around the time when crack first, entered the Midwest. It's like 86. And within the first 6 months, every imaginable horror that comes with that culture, I experienced, from a childhood friend being murdered to being, robbed at gunpoint, to eventually becoming addicted to crack at 14 years old, and then being beat nearly to death and left in a crack house to basically, figure life out.
So obviously there's a lot, going on with the lead up to all the Black Lives Matters protests. All of the way that the African-American community and the police have been interacting with for generations. Yeah, it's like things that have been happening forever are starting to really come to light in a big way. We had the shooting in Atlanta this week, but, when all the eyes in the world are on you, it's like shit like that's still happening. Tell me about your first run-in with the police and what that relationship was like, especially before going to prison.
First time I was ever abused by police, it was around 14. And so we were in that first house that I mentioned, we were selling drugs, and they came and raided, but there was no drugs there. And because they couldn't find drugs, they basically just beat our ass, and took my money and took me home and dropped me off, and they kept the money. But, it's one of those things back then, was like not even understanding your rights, Like, I don't know any of my friends that haven't been roughed up, haven't been, snatched up, pulled over, pulled out the car, and procedures never follow. And so it's a very delicate relationship. George Floyd's death isn't just that was just kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't like, oh, this is one isolated incident that doesn't happen.
Once hashtag BLM stops trending on social media, what do you think are the most valuable long-term investments we can make at an individual level to support Black Lives Matter and all basic human rights?
Yeah, I think two things has to happen, right? One is a narrative shift. Like, really think about, what is the story you're telling yourself about people who don't look like you, who come from somewhere different? I think our media has done a horrible job at its depiction of Black men specifically and Black people in general. So being mindful of the narrative that not only you're consuming, but that you're actually regurgitating. And I think the second part of that is proximity. In order to really understand people, you have to be proximate to them. It's one thing to donate money to criminal justice reform. It's a whole different thing to actually go inside a prison and volunteer and learn who the people are in there and kind of remove some of those barriers. To go to some of these organizations, it's great to donate money. Obviously, they have operating costs, but it's even greater to actually say, hey, maybe I can help people write their resume. Or I can actually go into space and then come back to my employer and say, hey, you know what, I met this really smart person. I think you should give them a shot. And so proximity changes things, and then understand yourself. Go back to your worst moment, the absolutely time that you did the shittiest thing you can think of, and ask yourself, first of all, would you want people to know you for that thing? And secondly, would you want to be judged for that one moment for the rest of your life? You know, so there's so many different things that we go through as humans. And a lot of times we don't give ourselves permission to actually say, you know what, I kind of fucked that one up. If I can get a do-over. And so instead what we do is we say, I fucked that up, and then we just hope nobody ever finds out about it. And so if you can really operate with that level of understanding of other people whose worst moments are on display, you know, it changes the game.
How should companies try to improve the diversity of their employee base?
You know, I think again, it's a proximity thing. We typically hire, you know, people that look like us. Ben talks about that a lot, of like the hiring practice. You know, we have to understand the capabilities of people in different spaces and different cultures, and how much value it adds to your company, you know, to really have diverse talent to draw from. Like, we make shit hot. Like, we bring swagger into the room that's like unquestionably marketable. Like, those are the facts, right? And so when you're excluding those people in a room, you're creating a very bland culture, and you're missing out on this talent pool that may be a little unconventional, may be a little loud and brass, and, you know, swagger may be a little different, but at the same time, the value add of that is immeasurable when you think about who the consumers are, who makes culture, you know, fire. They don't always fit into some neat box, and, you know, we don't always have the branding of, you know, the big colleges and things like that. You know, you want to keep people around that got some grit, some people that got some innovation, that got a spirit of resiliency, and the talent to match that.
Well, Shaka, we are so thrilled to have you as part of the Cameo family. Your words inspired, I think, everybody on here. I know I'll never forget this conversation, and hope we can have many more in the years to come. But thank you, my friend, for spending time with our team today.
Thank y'all so much for having me, man. And yeah, just reach out anytime, man. Let's just continue building.